Hey, what's up, guys? Node Investor here. Checking in on the crypto markets. We want to do a weekly recap and take a look at some price points, some specific levels to be watching going into the weekend. We typically see a little bit lower volume into the weekend, but you can also see some outsized moves over the weekend, as some of the moves tend to be very quick due to the lower liquidity. So something to keep an eye on as we head into the weekend. I'll give you guys the positive, the negative, but first let's take a look at the weekly recap. It has been a brutal sell-off this week across the board, continuing from last week's weakness, but we saw much bigger moves to the downside this week as many names just sold off hard, especially following some of the news on the delay of the VanEck Bitcoin ETF. There's other proposals, but it was simply a delay, but the market reacted significantly to that and very negatively. And so we can see here on the numbers in the last 7 days, Bitcoin is down 14%, Ethereum very close, Ripple down 24%, EOS almost 24% there, going down, IOTA down 37% in the last 7 days, with 10% of that coming in the last 24 hours. Monero down 20%, Neo down 25%, Neo at $21. And so you guys get the idea. There are just some significant drawdowns across the board. And you can sense it certainly in the crypto sphere, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on comments here on the YouTube channels, or even in my private Slack groups. I mean, it's absolutely bearish out there. There's a lot of despair, a lot of disappointment, and understandably so. I mean, with these type of moves, especially for those that have ridden the entire move down, there's been some substantial moves, and even in the last week, the moves have been surprising to the downside for many who were kind of just recently buying in and hoping to see some reversals. But the altcoins continue just to get hit very hard and outperform or underperform BTC here. You can see that as the Bitcoin dominance continues to rise. It's been rising here steadily since the bottom, the BTC bottom in May, the top of the market in May. And you can see here we are now approaching over 49%, getting very close to that 50% mark. The total cryptocurrency market cap stands right around that $225 billion. Will we dip below 200 billion? It's not that far away anymore, and it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. Now let's go take a look at the charts. So looking at Bitcoin first, you can see on the daily chart here, this is just kind of the big picture view coming in from the top. And clearly we've been making this long series of lower highs. There's a good argument for a big descending triangle forming here. And there's some good and some bad. The good news is prices are very near long time support levels just below that 6K zone. The bad news is prices are once again testing long time support levels, and why that's bad news is because the more times something tests these levels in and around the 6K, there's a good chance that it's gonna finally break to the downside. And so that's something you have to be aware of here. I've been talking about if we broke below that support around 6,800, that for me would be a signal that we're going to go below 6K again. I don't expect it to hold up on another test. I hope I am proven wrong on that. And there's a couple of reasons to think we could see a bounce here. I'll go over that shortly. But just looking at the price action first, you can see we saw a pretty good sell-off this week. And prices found support right around that 61, 6,200 zone, which was the most recent low when we formed that big inverse head and shoulder patterns. That was the most recent swing low before we had a very strong breakout and a move higher up to 8,500. And so we basically fully retraced that, and right at support is where we found the first real attempt for the bulls to start defending price action. So zooming into the 4-hour chart, you can see that was a big move down. A ton of volume came in here at the lows, and you're starting to see the first real attempt at the bulls trying to defend that zone there. And so now the onus is on the buy side. I mean, the bulls have to prove that they're going to start pushing this higher. Right now, the momentum is still very much in favor of the sellers and to the downside. And you're seeing any bounces right now are just being sold into. we'll see that here shortly when we look at the short interest chart as it continues to rise significantly, even as Bitcoin prices are bouncing a little bit here. But right now, all we've done is just form a little bit of a symmetrical pattern now here at these lows. You can see it a little easier on that 12-hour chart. We've had this low, a high, a higher low. Now we're making a lower high and a higher low here. And so things are really starting to coil up here. They're really starting to consolidate. The price range is narrowing, but all that's doing is allowing the moving averages to come in, to get closer to the price. Looking at the 4-hour chart, the moving averages still have not been able to get much above the 10 EMA for very long before they get sold into again. And so that's what we're seeing right now, just these bounces into resistance. Now, we do have an opportunity to set a higher low here, and we'll get confirmation of that when prices can close above 6,600. If we do, then I expect you'll see some more short covering at that point, because now you're starting to set a trend, an intermediate short-term trend of higher lows. First resistance, I mentioned in my video yesterday, I'm still looking for that 6,800 to 6,900 as being that first wall of resistance. On the daily chart, the 10 EMA sits right around 6,900, and so depending on how quickly it takes to get there, if there is a bounce, then that's where I'm going to be looking as the first big resistance level. And then above that, going into 7K psychological, and then 7,300 if we can get that high of a bounce. Unless we get a pretty decent bounce here soon, this moving average is just going to catch up, and right now this is forming a little bit of a pennant, and it is technically a bear pennant because it is following this downtrend, and so the momentum is certainly to the downside. So I'd be watching this higher low pattern forming. If it breaks to the downside, then most likely we're going to break right through that support we saw around 6,100 and then retest the lows right around 5,800. Now, prices are starting to hit these oversold conditions. The daily chart could absolutely go lower. RSI on the daily is hitting right around 34. Has it gone lower? Has it gone to the 20s before? Absolutely. And so if prices continue lower, there is room to the downside, but it is certainly feeling a little bit oversold right now. We're bouncing from these extreme oversold levels on the 4-hour, and we're starting to pull back in right now. But I want to point out the shorts. And so looking at the short interest here, let me close out these indicators because they really don't matter on the short side. There we go. So looking at the short interest, you can see here, since the month of August started, we've had this huge run up in short interest, and it's been going up every day. And even yesterday, as Bitcoin was finding some support, it's continued to go up here, and we're finally seeing a little bit of a pause here. So this is the quantity of open short interest here on Bitfinex, and you're seeing a little bit of a pause, some covering, which is supporting prices, but until we see a dramatic pullback, a big drop, you're not going to really see much of a short covering rally. Now, we have seen short covering rallies in the past. The last biggest one, the real big significant one, was the one we saw here on April 12th, when you saw a dramatic drop in the shorts, and that was that big pop off of the lows after that late March, early April consolidation in the crypto market. And then that kicked off a pretty good rally, and you can see the short interest continue to decline going into that rally. Here in August, we've seen another big run. Maybe we're pausing here a little bit. Could it continue higher? Absolutely. We're not at historic levels. We're certainly not at the levels we saw in March, April, even though prices are certainly hitting those levels again. And so just something to keep an eye on. Shorts are absolutely piling on here, and they're betting on more downside action. And so far, the trend has proven that we will continue to see downside action until we can start to see that trend reverse. So something to keep an eye on here on the short side. So we're taking a look at Ethereum. Now I want to point out a couple of things here on Ethereum, because this one is certainly looking weaker and a little bit more vulnerable than Bitcoin right now. And so Ethereum is sitting right at support, and it's technically breaking down below support now here on the dollar pair. And you can see we had this strong support right around that 370 zone, and that happened in early April before the big rally. And now we come right back to that, and we broke it pretty good. And so we're testing this little bit of support zone, but it's not looking positive for Ethereum here. So it needs to recover quickly if it's going to reverse this trend. Going into the short-term picture, I'm actually bearish on it, and looking at this potential bear flag starting to break down. And so it's looking like another short entry for Ethereum here, as the 10 EMA is just catching up here. Not much of a bounce happening. Looks like it wants to roll over now. And also looking at Ethereum from the BTC side, You can see here it's testing this long time support level and also right at those April lows here. So if it breaks down further on the USD pair, if the Bitcoin market continues to break below and lose support, then I expect Ethereum will underperform and break below this support. And this would be a big break versus BTC, which would see some acceleration on the USD pair. And so right now, Ethereum is certainly looking much weaker than Bitcoin. And it's also a little bit vulnerable here as the market continues to look soft. So this, unfortunately, is a little bit of a bellwether that I use for some of the alts, and it is telling a story that the alts are continuing to underperform, especially with light of the ETF news. So there's going to still be that in the back of the mind of traders that are going short. There's always the risk that we get some sort of positive news coming out along the ETF line, which will trigger a little bit of a rally. And in that case, I don't think ETH or some of the alts will perform as strongly because a lot of folks will start piling back into Bitcoin. And so just something to keep an eye on here. And so I am leaning bearish on Ethereum, and that's the levels that I'm going to be watching here going into the weekend and today even, as it looks like it wants to break down here a little bit. Okay, now that I've painted a real negative picture and you guys are still with me, I want to point out some positives and some potentials to look out for on the upside. Clearly, prices are stretched to the downside. You can see on the 10 EMA is down here about 7% below, and at one point was over 10%. On the positive, we are right at support. So if prices are going to bounce, this is where you would see a pretty decent bounce happen from. The shorts are piling in big time. So eventually they have to cover, and so you will see some short covering rally take place. Going to the weekly chart, you can see here on the weekly chart we've had two big red weeks in a row following two very strong green weeks, and so we fully have given up all of those gains. We are now retesting the lows that were set in the prior 3 weeks before the rally. So you can see these lows here right around that 6,300 zone, and we're retesting that right now. Now, volume here on last week was slightly lower than the week before, and so far the current week is still lower, but we still have a few days left, and so it'll likely finish right at around the same. And so it's just totally erasing this little bit of a pause here. But two red weeks in a row, we could see a little bit of a bounce here, which would not surprise me, especially considering how high the short interest is starting to climb. But the fact remains, we are testing a key support level. A lot of analysts and traders are still looking at that psychological 6K zone, but my opinion has been, now that we've broken below that 6,800 zone, I think we'll see a retest of 6K, but I don't expect it to hold this time. Now, whether that happens in this current leg down or after a little bit of a bounce is yet to be seen, but that's the stance I'm taking right now. That's kind of the point of view that I have, the approach that I'm taking. So I am absolutely conservative here in my trading. I have traded a few bounce trades here this week, but when you're doing counter trend trades, it's absolutely tough. You got to certainly take it cautiously, take profits quick, and raise your stops when you can get them. So looking at a few of those, Cardano made for a little bit of a bounce trade this week. You can see it was showing some strength early off the lows, making a series of higher highs before ultimately starting to pull back here. But they made for some nice trading here yesterday, and taking profits quick. Certainly you can see it bounced right into resistance, which is what you expect to happen on these, and so you start locking in those gains when you get them. Stellar has been strong, probably the strongest name here in the last day or so, but this is also coming on the back of some news, and so you're seeing some reaction, some partnership with Facebook, and Stellar just continues to have a lot of news and catalysts going for it. They're potentially being added to Coinbase. There's some IBM partnerships that are continuing to develop, and now there's Facebook potential. So there's just a lot of things happening here, and this has just been driving this one, absolutely bucking the trend here in light of some of the other names that are showing some weakness. So it's been one of the stronger names here off the lows from the exact low, already up around 20% or so. Beyond that, NEO, we've been looking at this falling wedge for some time. Now NEO is on the dollar pair, very weak and very oversold. No signs of the bulls showing up yet, but a lot of charts are starting to show this pattern here. But we've been watching these charts develop here for a good week or two already. So just because they're developing doesn't mean they're actually going to break out. You ultimately need to wait for some confirmation to the upside. It could just as easily break below, but I'm always trying to look ahead, always trying to think of what's going to be the next potential pattern, the next move here. You're seeing the RSI level starting to hit the extreme lows again. And so I'm going to be looking out for some of those reversals. But until you see some confirmation to the upside, I will remain cautious because we've seen some reversal attempts here, but most of them have been very short-lived and have been sold into as quickly as they bounce. And so that's going to be it for today, guys. Just wanted to bring that weekly recap. It's been a rough week in the markets. Absolutely, I'm with you guys. I understand the comments, how you feel, what you're looking at, some of the despair, the resignment out there, just kind of giving up on crypto. It's not going away, guys. And yes, prices are getting crushed. Let's not sugarcoat it. There's just no way around that. But ultimately, the space is not going away. It will continue to mature. But you guys know where I stand. Some of these alts may not recover, right? But many of them will. Going back to the market cap, you have to look at what are some of the quality projects here, some of the names, some of the projects that actually have working products, those type of things. You know, some of those names are going to stick around, but we all know that many of these will not. And you're seeing a big valuation reset as the market continues to go through this bear market that we're in right now. So I do believe in this long term. I do believe ultimately we will see a low, and I believe ultimately Bitcoin will hit a new high. When that happens is anyone's guess, but I'm going to take it one day at a time. Mostly I've been trading this right now anyway, so whether that's going long or going short, you kind of just go with the trend when you're trading. But from a long-term HODL perspective, we're not there yet. We're not ready, and the market has to prove itself that it has put in a good low. So I hope everyone has a good weekend. I appreciate you guys watching, appreciate you guys being here. And until next time, take care, everyone.